Okay, so we've finished with the Ghost of Paladin Past, and it's time for a visitation from the Ghost of Paladin Present. Now, where are we at the moment? Well, when WoD came out, not a massive amount changed. I would say a lot of our offensive abilities stayed the same. We did lose some abilities. We lost George, Guardian Radiant Kings. So lining up, you know, two different DPS cooldowns that kept going out of sync with each other was no longer a thing as such. You know, the only one you could get really was Holy Avenger as a talent, which existed in MOP as well. But, you know, same cooldown. So that was fine. We lost Hand of Salvation. You could argue we don't miss it massively in raiding at any rate. Inquisition went, but of course was partly replaced by its retarded cousin Seraphim in the form of level 100 talents, which for a while I didn't have to use. I sort of do use it now in quite a few fights. But by and large, we stayed the same basic principles still applied. No sweeping changes to the way we played, certainly not on the scale that's going to be coming in Legion. At the start, I mean, it was really a case of rushing to level and then rushing to gear and then getting another character geared and leveled, all while working around work for you know, slight split runs. We didn't really do split runs in any great deal at the start, but we did try that. No tier bonus in High Maul. But some people did have set bonuses, didn't they? Because there was the PvP set, which was very powerful in PvE. Now, I didn't get that because I was utterly convinced. It was like, I was thinking to myself, this is not intended. They are surely going to stop this working in raids, at least, if not only allow it to work in PvP situations, because otherwise it makes no sense. And to have got this 4 set would take a considerable amount of time in Ashran over a period of weeks, something I wasn't prepared to do. The Ashran queue was, apart from the fact I don't like PvP in this game, I may have mentioned that once or twice, but Ashran was particularly annoying because, first of all, the queue lasted about an hour, and then when you were in, it gave you like a minute to get in quickly. Now, compare that with Battlegrounds. Battlegrounds, okay, the queue time is whatever the queue time is, but you get 2 minutes. Also, I have a G19 keyboard, and it flashes up when I've entered, when the Battleground queue has come up. I don't know why it doesn't work with Dungeons or anything, but it works with Battlegrounds fine. So if I'm browsing on the web, and let's face it, if I'm going to be waiting in a queue, like an hour queue, I haven't got an hour's worth of like stuff that I want to be doing, especially in WoD. So I'm bound to be flicking through websites or doing something else. So to have no warning that it's come up, for me to actually having to be staring at my screen when this thing comes up. And even then only to have a minute, so even browsing back and forth, you're still very likely to miss it. So the number of times I missed it, and I ended up just thinking, sod it, you know, I'm going to get it, you know, several weeks in, and then they're going to disable it, and it's gone. And they never did. So it's like, oh. And every time I thought to myself, oh, they haven't disabled it yet, it was like, should I do it? No, because they're going to disable it. And they never did. So some people got a set bonus, some people didn't. I didn't. I didn't. In terms of how Retribution played, the utility, with the loss of utility was a problem. And it has been a problem throughout this expansion. We have got, I mean, people go, oh, you've got utility. Yes, we have. But it's not utility that makes us worth bringing over, say, someone else. I mean, what have we got? We've got Blessing of Protection. I can think of one fight off the top of my head where that was really useful. Another fight where it, or another couple of fights maybe where it could be used. It wasn't all that brilliant. I mean, in High Maul, Tectus, it was useful to use it on healers for the very end of the fight, so that healers didn't have to run. They could just heal, stood still. But by and large, it wasn't very awesome. Whereas a raid cooldown is useful all the time. You know, if you've got Smoke Bomb, or you've got something that, you know, something that does raid-wide damage reduction, that is useful in every fight. Every fight When it is difficult for you, as all fights are when you're progressing through them, there is always a time when that is useful. Bop, this is the odd fight. Blessing of Sacrifice or Hand of Sacrifice, okay, fine. But think about when that's useful. Mostly you would use that on a tank. Not always, but mostly that's for use on a tank. So, in which case you need to wait for it to be called. You don't just use cooldowns on tanks willy-nilly, because any decent tank uses that as... They use your cooldown as a resource. They will call for it. And a lot of times they just don't, because other people bring things as well, and healers have their own things. So it's not as useful as you might think. But raid cooldowns, damage reduction cooldowns, things like that are always useful. Always. But in terms of the damage, there was I can't think of a fight in Highmoor where there was any problem. And there were some fights for which we were pretty good. Like Korag, for example. We were quite flexible on that. I mean, I went Final Verdict because we had a lot of physical damage dealers in the raid at the time. Were it otherwise, could have gone Seraphim. So, we have some measure of control over how much of our damage is magical and how much is physical. It's really useful in a fight like Korag. So we're really good there. There were a few other fights as well we were really good at, and there was no fights I would say we were weak at. The level 100 talents obviously is the big new thing. Not particularly impressed. I think a lot of people are not hugely impressed. I mean, if we look at them, you've got Final Verdict, which is the least annoying because all it does is essentially buff an ability you're already going to be using anyway. It gives it a small range, so you can be, if something's been chased around or kited around by the tank or just moved, then you can be using it while you're running after it, so that's always good. It has the interplay with Divine Storm, which in theory sounds really good, weaving Final Verdict and Divine Storm in an AoE or cleave type situation. Sounds really good. Mostly it's only really good on trash though, because generally speaking, when you've got ads up, in most fights where there are ads, they're only up for a short amount of time because you burst them down so quickly. I'm not saying all the time, but most of the time that was the situation. But Final Verdict, it wasn't too bad, but it's not particularly interesting. Then you've got Seraphim. Seraphim used on the Butcher in Highmoor. It was useful for that. Problem is that when we got to the Butcher, I hadn't really done enough practice with it, I think, and it wasn't optimal. I would say my use of it was not optimal, but it was okay. And the problem with it, especially on the Butcher, which is such a short fight, because it has this, it's 30-second cooldown, and it only lasts for 15 seconds, and you're not going to get amazing use out of it in the first few of those 15 seconds because you've blown all your holy power using it, so you've got to build your holy power back up. But in a very short fight like the Butcher, it was like, if the fight ends 20 seconds either way of a particular time, it could mean the difference between very low damage and very high damage, because it's like any buff. If a fight ends just as a powerful buff is coming online and getting ready to use again, then you've missed out. If the fight ends just as you finish using a powerful buff, then you win. And the Butcher was terrible for that because it was such a short fight. But I would say without the tier bonuses in Highmoor, you could use the full range of things. The other one, of course, was Empowered Seals. Don't like the Empowered Seals gameplay. Nothing wrong with the damage from it. It's reasonably competitive. In fact, perfectly competitive. It's just crap playstyle. I do not like it. Many people don't like it. But yeah, in Highmoor you could use full range of things. There were some fights where you would use, say, Divine Purpose. There were some fights where you use Sanctified Wrath. There were some fights where you use Holy Avenger, or I did anyway. And so from that point of view, it was really good. Then Blackrock Foundry came out, and all of a sudden we got tier bonuses. Although it took me a while to get them. We didn't do split runs in Blackrock Foundry in the guild I was in, and we paid for it big time. Not a mistake we made in Hellfire Citadel. We absolutely paid for it. It took me several weeks to get 4 set, which is ridiculous. Conqueror just wasn't... It wasn't that we had loads of Conqueror users. We had a few. They just weren't dropping. They just didn't drop. So, but once we did have that, all of a sudden then we're Final Verdict and Divine Purpose. That's just what you're going to use on every fight. And that's pretty much how it was. The only choice with talents was essentially which speed talent you use. Long Arm of the Law has become my staple this expansion. Occasionally using Speed of Light, but not as often. And whether it's Execution Centers or Light's Hammer, pretty much it. That's essentially it. You know, the 2 and 4 set demanded that you use Divine Purpose and Final Verdicts. That's just how it was. But the fights again in Blackrock Foundry, damage-wise, very competitive, no problem at all. But again, that utility, it could have just been better. The only fights I came across where you felt, actually, I'm probably not ideal on this fight, was Iron Maidens and then followed immediately by Black Hand. So the last 2 fights, or what would have been the last 2 fights for most people, were the ones where you're quite poor. In the other ones, I never felt poor. I always felt pretty flexible, pretty strong. I mean, Iron Maidens, for example, I went up on the boat for 2 of the boats, but the damage was just so inconsistent. It's like sometimes I'd do loads of damage on it, and sometimes it wouldn't be nearly as much, because again, over a short time, especially when you're using something like Divine Purpose, there were times when I tried using Sanctified Wrath and Holy Avenger just for the boats, just so that I had more consistent damage, but it just didn't do as much damage. So you were totally dependent on RNG, because it was, although the fight itself was long, that period of time when you had a really important job to do, it's too short. And when you're subject to the RNG of, say, Empowered Divine Storms and Divine Purpose, no. So that wasn't good. But as I say, overall damage absolutely fine. Utility stinks as always. But this seems to have been it. You know, in WoD this was very similar as well with the set bonuses, in that it changes your playstyle. Playstyle completely changed in Blackrock Foundry compared to Highmore because of the set bonuses. The set bonuses don't enhance things that you're doing anyway. They completely change what you do. And the same happened with the tier we have now in Hellfire Citadel. Yet again, it completely changed the playstyle. So we ditched Divine Purpose. I mean, Divine Purpose is maybe useful on Hellfire Assault, especially if you're killing things really quickly and it's not worth having a longer Avenging Wrath. But almost all fights you're going to use Sanctified Wrath. There's a bit more choice, at least with the level 100 talents, Final Verdict, Seraphim, and Empowered Seals. There's a bit more choice there. And also, you're encouraged to use different ones anyway. On some fights, I use Final Verdict. On some fights, I use Seraphim. And that has been the case right from the word go. This isn't just now on farm. You know, when I was progressing on bosses, some bosses I found Seraphim to be better, some Final Verdict. And, you know, it's changed perhaps a little as the years get on. But there are still that good mix. So you had more choice in a way. But again, the way you're playing is determined by those set bonuses. It's not just that the set bonuses are powerful. The set bonuses should be powerful to make it, especially when you're moving from one tier to another, to give you a decision to make. Because I had a decision to make. It was like, okay, when do I... Ideally, of course, in the first week, you'd get all of the new tier and then there's no problem. But if you don't, if you get a couple of pieces, it's like, do I break up my 4 sets, my previous 4 set for the last 2 set and the current 2 set, or do I wait until I can go straight from 4 set to 4 set? So you've got to work all this out. You've got to make sure you know what's better. Maybe on some fights one is better, on some fights another. So I was loading up my bags again, keeping some of my old Blackrock Foundry gear while I was finding my way around that. And on some fights, as I say, going straight for the new 2 sets. Some of them I was just sort of waiting. But fortunately, because we were doing the split runs, I didn't have a long time to wait to get the new 4 set anyway. It was like second week or something like that. Then that was okay. That was fine. In terms of what we've sort of been quite good at in this expansion, we've been good at bursting things down on demand. We have been very good at that. And that's been the case in all the tiers. I remember, you know, instead of looking at overall damage, I've always sort of looked at damage on priority targets. And in Highmore, Blackrock Foundry, and Hellfire Citadel progress, my damage on priority targets has always been very, very high. Often top on progress. Perhaps on farm a little less so. Blackrock Foundry was the worst one for farm because as people's item levels got better, we scaled so much worse. It was hideous. I don't think we scaled brilliantly at the moment, but it doesn't seem to be as bad in Hellfire Citadel. With the item level improvements, I haven't felt as bad comparatively. It's very difficult to judge because I'm in a different guild to the one I progressed with, or did most of the progress on. But in Hellfire, in Blackrock Foundry, it was dreadful. I went from, you know, being very, very competitive, even top damage or very close to top damage on many fights. And as we're farming it, and we've cleared everything, we're farming it, every week I seem to go further and further down the damage meters, even on priority targets. And it wasn't that, you know, my percentiles were remaining high, in fact getting higher, if anything. So, you know, I know that I was keeping in check with other Retribution Paladins at my level. Just wasn't matching the rest of my guild, the rest of the roster. But at least on progress it's been fine. But I do worry, or I certainly worried at the time, for Retribution Paladins in guilds who are behind us on progress, thinking you're having a rough time, you're getting just towards the end of the tier, perhaps, and you'll be scaling as badly as I am and doing pretty badly out of it. So I always think that's a terrible shame when they do that. I know Retribution Paladins have a bit of a victim culture about us, but I do think Blizzard, and not just for us, we're not the only ones, it's just that we seem to be consistently the one. It's like, I would say this tier, Retribution Paladins have been fine on progress. I think we've been okay, but the utility has hit us. Certain ones on damage, like Windwalker Monks, for example, have been hit badly this tier. And then, but on each tier there always seems to be a couple of specs that just seem to have been allowed to be a little bit weak at the top end. I'm not talking lower down, because lower down player skill will more than compensate for, and the differences in classes, let's be honest, are quite small. Blizzard are not idiots. You know, they're not going to have gaping differences between them. But what differences do exist are magnified when you're playing even close to optimally. So yeah, Retribution Paladins do have this victim culture, because we often see ourselves as, well, they're not really properly looking after us. We're always the last to get updates. Like in beta, we're always the last one to be tuned, and in PTR the same thing, we're always the last one. Hasn't worked out at the moment, actually, I have to say, because in Alpha, Retribution Paladin is out, and there's some specs that are not. But so we'll see. We always remain in hope. We'll see about that one. Other things, I mean, where we are at the moment is actually, the way we play at the moment is okay. I am looking forward to Legion, but that's more in the next one. But I'm reasonably happy with the way we play at the moment. Apart from the level 100 tasks, not too keen on that. What I mainly have a gripe with, I have two main gripes where we are at the moment. One, I'm not at all keen on set bonuses massively dictating the way we play. And we're not the only class that gets this. Some classes and specs, their set bonuses determine the way they have to play as well, so they change their play style. Some of them, it's by trinkets. I mean, trinkets can have a fairly significant effect on the way you play as well. I mean, the soul capacitator, soul capacitator trinket, is it? Or totem or something like that. For agility users, that changes the way you approach your gameplay. So we're not the only ones, but I don't like that aspect of it. I mean, if it sort of changed it slightly, I mean, anything with a set bonus is bound to change something slightly, because it, you know, if it's going to be a flat increase to a particular ability, it might bung that ability up in the priority or something like that. But such massive change to gameplay, some people might like it though. They might find it refreshing, each tier that you play completely differently. I don't know. I mean, you always adapt, don't you? You just have to learn it and adapt to it. Practice in PTR as well. Try and get yourself into beta, because expansions, of course, bring massive changes. So yeah, tier bonuses changing your gameplay is one thing, and the other thing is, of course, raid utility, raid-wide utility. The lack of it, because some people are just, I mean, you know, everyone's been in this situation, I'm sure. I've certainly been in this situation where you've seen someone in your raid who you know is doing badly. they're playing very poorly. And they might play poorly on a consistent basis, but they're always there. And you know the reason they're always there is because of their class. Their class brings something that is worth all the headaches over their poor play. And there are not enough of that class to just say, sod you, I'm recruiting another one. And we don't have that yet. We don't have that yet. So I would say that's where we are at the moment. I've been reasonably happy with us from my personal point of view, this expansion, with those two provisos. And the second one being the biggest gripe. There are things to look forward to, though. So that is where I'm going to leave the present, Retribution Paladin in the present, and where I am in the present. And I'm going to look forward in the next video, which will come out just in time for Christmas in a few days, Christmas Eve. The Ghost of Paladin Future. What does Legion have in store for us? Till then, I'll see you later.